Greetings, R enthusiasts. This is issue 2 of Exploring Our Packages with a Chipmunk, where we're going to go out of the gate. Let's get going right away here. We'll be covering 3 kind of themes: ggplot, foundational tools, and other basic tools. So ggplot gets its own thing because it's pretty important. Foundational tools will involve dpylr and the tidyverse, which is actually kind of one and the same thing because the tidyverse includes dpylr in it. But enough said on that. We'll also look at some other basic tools that are useful: M61R, rchallenge, and Rcmdr. Let's get into the summaries. So for ggplot2, to summarize, it's a system for declaratively creating graphics based on what they call the grammar graphics. Essentially, it's a way to make good, clear, consistent plots, which you can add and modify in a consistent way. Now, dpylr is a fast, consistent tool for working with data frame-like objects. So this is good for essentially data frames, archives of data frames. You might be more familiar with the term table, or things like that. It's good for manipulating data. Now, as I said before, dpylr is actually part of the tidyverse, which is a set of packages that work in harmony because they share common data representation and the same sort of design. Now, I pulled out dpylr from the tidyverse in general just because the tidyverse has a bunch of packages, so we can't go through all of them all at once, so I wanted one kind of representative one to kind of drill into a little bit, and then the tidyverse can be more of a broad strokes approach. All right, so moving on here, we have M61R. So it's data manipulation in one package in base R that has minimal if no dependencies. So it's kind of a lightweight thing for a version of like dpylr, other things like that, where you don't have to load other stuff in. It just uses what's already there in base R, so it's kind of useful. And for the purists out there who don't like to have to download all sorts of packages, it's kind of nice. Now, rchallenge is kind of an interesting thing. It's a data science challenge system using Markdown and Dropbox. So essentially what you can do is create challenges for teams to work on. We'll take a little bit of a look at that. And then, of course, Rcmdr is a platform-independent biostatistics graphical user interface for R. So this is helpful for when you're beginning to do statistics and coding, but you don't really have a lot of coding skills. It kind of takes some of that coding issue away from you. So we'll see what that looks like. So now let's jump into looking at their PDFs and vignettes at a glance. I'll switch over to that now. Okay, getting started here. We have, this is the CRAN package information for ggplot2. So there's all sorts of information. I'll just kind of run through how these things look for this one, and then for all the other ones, you'll just need to jump in and roll and ramble with me here. So there's all sorts of information on version, what it depends on, different imports it'll do, and suggestions. When it's published, who did it, different resources, and there's all sorts of things that like reverse depends on imports, so other things that will need it, etc. Obviously, ggplot is pretty foundational, so a lot of things need it. Anyways, the important stuff we want here is in these downloads. Obviously, there's a package source and binaries, etc., but we want these reference manual and then vignettes. Now, every package will have a reference manual, and then some of them will have vignettes. So let's look at a reference manual. It looks like this here, and it'll go through all the different, let's scroll down here, all the different functions in it. So there's a lot to go here. So you get all sorts of things, but let's just go to the first one, or just one, and the big one is ggplot. That's kind of the foundational one. So you can see here for each of them, they'll tell you what the function is, what it does, a quick description. So this is initialize an object. It'll show the usage and all sorts of arguments, and then usually they have examples, and we'll replicate this here in R later, so don't worry. All right, let's go back. Another thing that's really helpful are vignettes. I really like these things. So for example, we go to this. This gives you less of a manual and more of a step-by-step examples. So this is extending ggplot2, where you can do more things in it than the base level. There's some other vignettes here, using ggplots and packages, so you can refer to functions, etc. And aesthetic specification, so this is nice if you want to really modify your graphs the way you want to. So that's where we go here. Let's sidle on over to our next one, dpylr. Again, we'll go down here. Let's look at the reference manual. We'll glance at it. So it has not nearly as many functions, but still has quite a few. Let's look at just maybe the first one here. Again, this is for manipulating data frames, so get across, applies a function across multiple columns. So things like that. Let's go to vignette. There's a lot of them. Let's go from base R to dpylr. This is kind of nice. This compares dpylr function to the base equivalent, so it shows how dpylr is an easier, faster way to use it than trying to do it in R. So here's a great table, so you can see how you can arrange, filter, mutate, etc. in dpylr, and it's a lot cleaner code than what you have to do in the base. So you can arrange row by variables, etc., and we'll see this in play when we look at the R code itself. All right, moving right along, let's go to the tidyverse. Again, this is a set of packages that work in harmony, and this package makes it easy to install, load them all together in a simple step. So if we see the tidyverse, it turns out there's not a lot going on here with this tidyverse because it's sort of like a package to install other packages and deal with that. So we'll not stay there too long. But these vignettes are nice. It talks about the manifestos, like what makes the tidyverse a tidyverse. A welcome to the tidyverse, which kind of goes through all sorts of things. This is kind of the big thing, how they're set up. Obviously, go through all this on your own time if you're interested in more. But here I have an actual website because it's such a big thing. The tidyverse kind of has its own, running. So let's just quick look at a little easier way to show what all the tidyverse packages are. So the core tidyverse. And turns out I was also failed to mention that ggplot is actually involved in the tidyverse too. So all we've been talking about so far has been tidyverse. But we got ggplot2, dpylr. There's tidyr. This helps tidy data. So plotting. Data manipulation, tidying data, there's readr, it helps to get data in and out, purrr, tools for working with functions and vectors, tibble, again, stuff with data frames, stringer helps work with strings, and then forecast is for problems with factors, so these are all very useful. It also has other packages for more specialized uses, but they're not loaded automatically with the tidyverse, you have to do them, call them separately, but there's all sorts of things for packages for importing, for wrangling data, for backends for dpylr, for programming, for modeling. So that is a little bit of the tidyverse. Of course, it's a verse, so you'll have to explore that more on your own. We only can just skim the very surface of the surface in our work here. All right, we'll jump out of the tidyverse to our first non-tidyverse package. This is M61R. Again, this is for sort of simple data manipulation. So there's a reference manual. It's actually rather small. It only has a few things. It looks a lot like dpylr. It can arrange, join, mutate, filter, etc. Let's take a look at the vignette, which is kind of nice. It gives you all these nice examples of these different functions. So I really like vignettes to help you do things right away with examples. And then here's just another vignette, but we won't need to go into that. Okay, now let's look at rchallenge. So this is a data science challenge system. So if you look in here, there's different things here, but the main thing is it actually talks about how you set this up. So you install it, and then you get started. You actually create a challenge, a place to put your challenge. So this is like a data science challenge. You put it somewhere, and it'll generate it. And then you can create teams. You can give them data and output, and they can essentially submit data, and you can pull out like the best stuff and all this sort of information. It's a little bit of beyond me at this point, but I thought to highlight it is very interesting if you want to dive deeper into this. Okay, last for today, we have Rcmdr. This is, again, a graphical user interface. So if we look at the PDF, there's not a lot of important things going on here because you're not really calling functions in R like you thought. You're going to, really what you want, all you're really going to be doing in R is doing the commander. Where is it? This will start the graphical user interface. And then you essentially, it's like SPSS or another kind of thing where you can drag and drop to run statistical analyses. And we'll take a look at that as well. So that concludes our session here. We'll go back and look at some R code. Okay, now I'm going to pull up RStudio so we can look at R code examples from each of those packages. Okay, here we are. I have already installed these and then ran them, brought them in with the library, but you'll need to do that on your own if you haven't done either of those steps. So let's move on, ggplot2. So we're going to generate some sample data here. This is straight out of the manual. And then we're going to create this first plot here, which is kind of nice. But then what we're going to do is we're going to modify it a little bit. And then finally, we're going to modify it again. And then we get these nice error bars here. So there we go. There's that. So let's look at dpylr. We already have the library in, so we don't need that. We're going to take a couple data sets, mtcar and irises. And we can do things, essentially we can turn them into tibbles, which are useful data frames that are better for manipulating. But then we can use this pipe operator to arrange empty cars by cycle and displacement. And this is what it looks like, and this is what a tibble format will be. We're going to have some more information than just kind of a raw table. So it's ordered by cycle and then displacement. We can also filter things. So this is a Star Wars data set. We're going to filter by all the humans. Here we go. There's all sorts of humans. We can filter by more than one. We could do hair color and eye color. So let's have no hair and black eyes. So there we go here. So moving on to just more tidyverse. Of course, there's all the different packages you can use in the tidyverse, but for the actual package tidyverse itself, you can list all the packages. So we've already seen some things like ggplot2, dpylr, purrr, tidyr, and then there's other ones for other uses. And then if we want to have a little fun, we can look at the tidyverse logo. Okay, now let's move to M61R. We're going to create, this again is manipulating data frames for like dpylr. We're going to take this CO2 data set and we're going to summarize it and set it as an object called TMP, temp, and we can show it. And this is just the mean and standard deviation of CO2. If we want to summarize it by groups, say type and treatment, we can do that as well, and we can pretty easily do that. So there we go. So a lot easier than trying to do this manually by yourself. Okay, finally, let's look at, or not finally, semi-finally, let's set a working directory. You'll have to do this for whatever your directory is and set a new challenge. And that'll populate that. This is, again, that information. And say if we want to have new teams, we can call them, as they call it, team foo and team bar. And now they're in the subdirectory. And if we want to do something in our challenge, we can publish, and it'll pull up all sorts of things here. Again, I'm just skimming the surface. You can dive much more into this. Finally, let's look at Rcmdr here. And this will start the graphical user interface. You can see here, we're just going to do some quick stuff. Let's look at data sets, some of the stuff that's already loaded from my workspace. Let's do the classical iris data set. We do all sorts of things. We can, first of all, we can view the data set, so we can look at them. That's nice. Why don't we make a histogram, a petal length. And that's going to pop up here. So we can do that sort of thing. If we want to do statistics, let's just say we want to do summaries. We can do that, but let's just go to a fit model. Let's do a linear regression, petal length, and petal width. And then down in the actual R code here, we see it running all the codes. You see what it does, and this is our linear regression. Okay, with that, I think we can step out now. Now, some brief scoring and classification, and even briefer justification. For ggplot2, I'm giving it 5 acorns out of 5. It's really great. I use it all the time, and it is primarily graphing. dpylr, I'm going to give 4. It's very good. I don't use it as much, and it's good for formatting. Tidyverse is going to be 5 out of 5, because, again, it actually includes ggplot and dpylr, so it's great general purpose classification. N61R, I'm going to give 3 out of 5. It seems useful, I just haven't really used it much. Again, it's like dpylr for formatting. Rchallenge, I'm going to give 2 out of 5, just because it's a special use. I don't know if I'll ever actually use it, but it's a cool concept. And then finally, Rcmdr is 3 out of 5. It's good for beginner use. I'm not scoring it higher because I'm following what I learned in my first statistics course, that it's not good for necessarily learning R if you want to actually code, because it takes away the coding portion of it, so you don't learn that very well. Okay, with that, we'll move on. All right, with that, let's have a little fun. We're going to take a final look at an R package called Roundhouse. Here we are back in R. Let's take a look at our library, Roundhouse. So loaded it in here. There's only a couple functions. The most important ones here, of course, is first punch. And what this does is it gives us a GIF of Chuck Norris punching and a Chuck Norris joke. Yes, this library is entirely random Chuck Norris jokes. Here is kick, which gives us a slightly different GIF. And another joke. So you can keep doing this. You can also get just like random jokes without the GIF, but these are the most fun. So there we go. Package Roundhouse for all your Chuck Norris needs. With that, I'll leave you with this teaser for next time on issue 3. We'll look at a bunch of assorted functions and an even larger list of miscellaneous data sets that we'll breeze through. Thank you and have a great day.